Can someone explain to me why? Every time Fromsoftware releases a new game, the only thing we can manage to talk about is how hard it is. Don't you feel like it's exhausting to have these same conversations every 2 or 3 years? The Elden Ring DLC Shadow of the Erdtree just dropped, but despite the limitless number of things we could have been talking about with it, it felt like all anyone was talking about at launch was how streamers were quitting it left and right after playing for like an hour. And don't get me wrong, Erdtree is tough as nails, but is it too hard? A lot of people seem to think so. A lot of people who've made fun of more casual gamers for finding Elden Ring and other FromSoft games too challenging are saying that the DLC is too hard. But is it? Is it? I'm not so sure. But I think that question speaks to a larger problem surrounding conversations about every FromSoft game. This happens like clockwork whenever the studio churns something new out. I remember noticing it for the first time when Sekiro came out in 2019, back when I was convinced this mustache sideburns combo was working for me. Is Sekiro too hard? How is it that the creators of Dark Souls could make a game this poorly designed? Those were the questions circling back then. The same questions circling now with Shadow of the Erdtree. The same questions people had when Bloodborne came out, and Dark Souls 3, and Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls, and Demon Souls. Do you see what I'm talking about here? Hey, what about Armored Core? Good question. I don't like those games. Sorry, I just don't. I haven't played them, and I can't speak to how they fit into the equation of everything I'm gonna talk about today. Maybe they prove me wrong. Or maybe, just maybe, they'd prove me even more right. Difficulty is an odd thing, you know? Like, I don't think I can blame anyone for bouncing off a game like Elden Ring for being too hard because it's an intentionally challenging game. As soon as you start up a new save and walk out into the beautiful fields of Limgrave, you get your teeth kicked in by the tree sentinel. I don't look at anyone who experiences that, says, you know what, I'm good, and walks away as like a quitter or anything because it's a specific type of experience that doesn't appeal to everyone. Well, okay, it appealed to a lot of people, but you know what I'm trying to say. Now, I'm not the first person to point this out, but the weird thing is that the people saying that Shadow of the Erdtree is too hard aren't the same people who walked away in Limgrave. They're the people who've beaten the base game, people who beat these things. So what happened? Why does every post about difficulty and bad design on Reddit or wherever the fuck always start with, I've been playing FromSoft games since Demon Souls, but this is just too damn hard? I don't know why I made him sound like that. What's even stranger to me is that this type of surface level conversation about FromSoft's difficulty isn't exclusive to Elden Ring or the DLC. But every time a new FromSoft game releases, people act like we haven't done this before, like we've never talked about this. Well, we have done this before, and I honestly just cannot keep talking about this. So let's do it one more time. Together, me and you. And then never again. Difficulty Discourse. Welcome back to the stage. I don't think that there is a single answer as to why everyone talks about how hard each new FromSoft game is at launch, but there is one obvious place to start. With each new game FromSoft makes, more and more people give them a shot. Take a look at the sales numbers for all the Souls-likes they've made. Do you like my graph? I made it myself. I don't make stuff like this very often, and honestly, I'm kind of proud of it. I'm like being for real with you right now. Anyway, while Demon Souls and the first release of Dark Souls were certainly successful, they didn't do Call of Duty numbers. With each new game from the studio, however, there are some very clear sales improvements. By the time Elden Ring finally came around, FromSoft was doing Call of Duty numbers, which means that a lot of people who've never even touched a Souls-like were jumping into the lands between and getting their shit rocked. I imagine if you didn't know what you were getting into and you just bought Elden Ring because everyone was talking about it, you might be left wondering why this game is so fucking hard. As FromSoft has gotten more and more mainstream, more people have picked up their games and learned just how much the studio likes to kick players' teeth in. So it makes sense then that conversations surrounding difficulty would happen with each new game release to some extent, right? But as we talked about before, it's not really the new players who are the ones complaining about difficulty from what I've seen at the very least. It's the Get Good crew who act like each new game is some horrifically designed mess. So why is that? Let's talk about encounter design for a moment. Come with me on this. Across all of the Elden Souls Bornero series? Gosh, we've got to come up with a better name for that. Because I know for a fact that someone in the comments is going to be like, I can't believe you called FromSoft games Souls-likes when they're not like Dark Souls. They are Dark Souls. But if I just call it Soulsborne, then we're not including Sekiro or Elden Ring. Let me know in the comments if there's some name we've all agreed to call them now. Oh, and while you're down there, subscribe. What was I saying? Encounter design, right. There were several times in my playthrough of Shadow of the Erdtree where my lost runes would be sitting in front of the fog wall of a boss arena, and I'm not the only one who experienced that. So what does this mean? Well, it means that the boss killed me really fucking fast. But is that because the boss is too hard? I don't think so. Now, there's nuance to this, but after studying a lot of the big fights in Erdtree, I noticed a pattern in the boss design. A lot of the bosses have attacks that are purposefully designed to anticipate player behavior. For example, it's very common for players to summon their spirit ashes the second they step into a boss arena. While they're doing that, they can't move or block or roll or anything like that. As a way of countering that ability, a lot of bosses will open immediately with an attack that will hit players who are summoning. Take a look at how R'hllana frequently opens the fight. It's an immediate deterrent for using spirit ashes right at the start of the encounter. The final boss, who I won't spoil here if you're still working through the game, does a similar thing where if you summon right out the gate, you'll be killed instantly, or at the very least, take a really big hit and have the distance between the two of you closed in just a second. Is this bad design? I simply don't think it is. I think it's just a response to player behavior that FromSoft noticed from the base game. Not to be like a YouTube contrarian or whatever, but I think it's good design, actually, since it pushes players out of their comfort zone from the moment they step into a fight. I've seen a take or two saying that this is FromSoft discouraging players from using spirit ashes, but I don't think that's true, at least not without any nuance. I think they're just pushing players to think about their use of spirit ashes in a different way, by upping the aggression of the bosses even further from where they were in the base game. Because bringing your mimic tier or an army of freaky little skeleton dudes can't be done at the beginning of a fight, it asks players to consider how necessary they actually are. It turns summoning them into a thoughtful mechanic, since you need to find an opening to summon now if you're going to summon at all. For me, it got me to get really careful about using spirit ashes in boss fights to the point where I just stopped using them for most fights. It pushed me to get better at the game, engage with its mechanics, and actually practice my skills. When looking at the boss design in Shadow of the Erdtree, there are a lot of little things that each boss does that anticipate common player behaviors. YouTuber YakoCMN also noticed that boss design thread and said in a recent video,
Shadow of the Erdtree quote-unquote opens with what I found to be two of the hardest fights, Divine Beast Dancing Lion and R'hllana Twin Moon Knight, but their overall design is a precursor for much of what you'll see in new bosses. Longer attack strings with delayed swings specifically designed to punish reckless action, alongside gap closers to punish unfocused attempts to heal or run away.
These are specific design choices that separate the bosses in the base game and the DLC, making the DLC feel harder because it's like the bosses watched how everyone got through Margit and Godfrey and took notes. The DLC forces players to think outside of their usual habits, otherwise they just straight up won't be able to beat the game. Some people might still complain that this makes the DLC's bosses too hard. I can certainly empathize with that, since there are a lot of bosses that wipe the floor with me for literal hours, but at a certain point, players do need to understand that adapting and overcoming obstacles is the core part of all FromSoft gameplay loops. With each game, the studio seemingly analyzes player behavior and crafts challenges that specifically counter those behaviors, just like with Erdtree. For example, Elden Ring's bosses in the base game do a ton of attack delays as a response to the way that a lot of Dark Souls 3 players were able to get through the game by spamming the dodge button. If you do that against Margit, you're gonna get killed. Bloodborne's entire combat design feels like a response to players hiding behind shields too much in Dark Souls 1 and 2, and the game almost entirely removes them. Sekiro is kind of the black sheep amongst FromSoft's catalog, but it feels like a response to players sleepwalking their way through boss fights without having to study their moves carefully, by creating overpowered builds with overleveling. With Sekiro's parry-based combat system and almost entire lack of RPG mechanics, fans of FromSoft games hit a wall because they were forced to actually take the time to learn the fights on a much more granular level. So let's clear the air here. When Sekiro came out in 2019, again, I was using this mustache-sideburn combo, I was firmly in the this is a bad game crowd because I didn't devote myself to learning its mechanics and honing the skills it requires to complete. I was the one saying this is too hard, but I get it now. I played through the game last year, learned the skills it wanted me to learn, and now I think it's FromSoft's best game. It's not poorly designed in the same way that Bloodborne isn't poorly designed, in the same way that Dark Souls 2 isn't poorly designed. FromSoft's games just challenge player expectations with every release, and when players have the behaviors they like challenged, it makes the game hard. Until you adapt. It seems to be a common consensus among fans that Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin Edition takes this concept to the extreme, and a lot of people don't like it for that reason. If you're not aware, Scholar of the First Sin is the re-release of Dark Souls 2 that changes things up from the base game to make it more challenging, as if they were all just sitting around going, you know what the problem with Dark Souls 2 was? Too easy. It's tough because it takes moments from the original game and makes them more difficult by countering player behavior, by adding new enemies to areas and making high-quality gear tougher to get. It feels like a response to how people were engaging with the base game, and honestly, I think that's pretty cool because it gives us some really clear-cut evidence of the ways that FromSoft does this sort of thing. Now, whether the specific changes to Dark Souls 2 totally land for everyone or not is a different conversation, but you can see what I'm getting at by bringing it up. So it's not that each game is too hard, but rather that each game challenges the tried and true methods that players have gotten used to using in the previous entry. Shadow of the Erdtree isn't a sequel to Elden Ring, but it's been long enough and the DLC is big enough for it to feel that way. So FromSoft used a lot of its follow-up design philosophy within it, causing reaction streamers to think it's too hard because they aren't engaging with the game design. All right, so it's worth pointing out that this guy, Asmongold, did go back and keep trying with the DLC after he said he was done with it, but that's not exactly relevant to the point. The point is, this guy, and many others like him, tried the DLC for a little bit, didn't engage with the new systems in place, and said it was too hard to be fun. That's the point I'm engaging with here. I do not care about Asmongold. Do not talk to me about him in the comments. I truly don't give a shit. Anyway, with Shadow of the Erdtree specifically, it felt like a lot of people were mad that it wasn't a power fantasy or something, because they just forgot that the loop of the game is about struggling with obstacles. It would be like if I complained that Elden Ring is a bad typing game. Like, yeah, it's just not even going for that at all. If it were, though, the final boss would be Mavis Beacon, Priestess of Keys.
Welcome to typing class. I'm your teacher, Mavis Beacon.
There's one final culprit when trying to understand why conversations about difficulty seem to absolutely dominate the space when new FromSoft games come out. And it's the die-hard hardcore FromSoft fans. Now, I want to be really careful about how I talk about this, because I have no interest in hating on anyone for how they choose to enjoy video games. That said, there is a very vocal part of the community that likes to belittle anyone who doesn't play the games in the way that they see fit. Back in the Dark Souls era, it was magic builds. They were seen as playing the games on easy mode. And now with Elden Ring's seemingly limitless gameplay options, there are a million different ways for certain fans to invalidate others based on their builds. People say that magic trivializes Elden Ring, that spirit summons are the game's version of easy mode, that bleed and poison and scarlet rot builds are cheating, that you didn't really beat the game unless you play the unpatched version of the Radon fight. And to me, these sorts of nebulous goalposts really suck any enjoyment out of talking about the game with just about anyone. I like to think that the people who make comments about how you didn't really beat the game without this or that or whatever are a vocal minority in the community, but I run into people who talk like that more often than I'd hope. Not only is it just flat out unfun to talk with people who act like this, but I think that as more of these sorts of conversations happen, people feel pressured to play FromSoft games in a way that isn't fun for them. I was talking about Elden Ring with a friend, and he mentioned that he beat one of the bosses, and then was like really embarrassed when he added to the story that he used his Mimic tier to do it. It sucked to hear him so dejected, like he thought I was gonna make fun of him or judge him for not being the most hardcore fan of the game. It was just surprising to me, because he's more of a casual fan, and yet he felt like his own accomplishment was almost invalid because he's been shamed into thinking that online. When people feel that pressure, they feel like they shouldn't engage with the systems that the game hands them, because they'll be made to feel inferior, and when they aren't engaging with every system they're offered, FromSoft games get really fucking hard. And then the conversation is about how hard the game is when newsflash, it's not. I'm not here to claim that I'm some master Elden Ring player. I'm not. But I thought the DLC was pretty easy. Well, maybe easy isn't the right word. It was par for the course in terms of Elden Ring difficulty, for me at the very least. Like, I struggled a lot, but as long as I was exploring and making sure to seek out Scadutree fragments, there wasn't much I had any extreme difficulty with that wasn't on par with what I experienced in the base game. Did I use Spirit Ashes? Yeah, in some fights. Others I didn't. But you know what? I had a lot of fun. I didn't beat the game in the most extreme circumstances imaginable, but I got to actually enjoy some excellent new Elden Ring content. When I looked online about the consensus among fans, though, it was pretty divided. A lot of the people saying it's too hard and leans too far into random bullshittery are the same ones policing my bleed build and saying that increasing your Scadutree level is the DLC's version of easy mode. Again, I'm not saying that I never got stuck on a boss or anything like that, I definitely did, and maybe saying it's easy is a little bit of a hyperbole in the opposite direction, but what I'm trying to say is that Erdtree is a lot of fun and a decent challenge as long as you don't have Reddit whispering in your ear saying that you're playing the wrong way. Here's the thing that I feel goes without saying when it comes to these sorts of people, but I'm gonna say it anyway, just in case you, the person watching this, haven't heard it. There is no easy mode in Elden Ring, Mimic Tier and Bleed build included. If you've beaten the game or even just beat a single boss, you've done something that's honestly pretty challenging, regardless of how you did it. The goalposts set by the people policing who actually beat the most recent FromSoft game are ever-changing and completely contradictory. For example, in Dark Souls, Bleed builds used to be the secret elite build for the hardcore players that they wouldn't tell you about, but now they're seen as cheating for no reason at all. If we gatekept every single system in the game that makes things easier for players, then not even the guys who look down on people for using summons would be able to beat the game. Like, oh, you used armor? Or you upgraded your weapons past its base abilities? Kinda sounds like you turned on easy mode to me. Just play the game and have some fun. Because it is fun. It's fucking challenging, but it's a good time. And honestly, it sounds like I had a much better time than the people who quit because they weren't interested in playing on easy mode in the eyes of some randos online. I'm tired of hearing about how these games are too hard when the second I see how someone is engaging with the game, I know that they're turning their back on the things that make the game fun in the first place. Before we wrap up here, I think it's worth pointing out that not all conversations surrounding difficulty and FromSoft games are invalid or annoying. Like we talked about earlier, there are a lot of new fans picking up FromSoft games for the first time thanks to the overwhelming popularity of Elden Ring. And those people talking about their difficulties with the game are really valid because they are hard, especially when you're not familiar with the hundreds of small, obtuse mechanics and details. After I beat Erdtree, I re-downloaded Dark Souls 3 and remembered just how much harder the Dark Souls series is than Elden Ring. There's a lot of nuance to that, don't fucking jump down my throat in the comments, but I'm just imagining how someone would react if they jumped right into Dark Souls after finishing up Elden Ring, thinking it would be a cakewalk and realizing that, no, these things are tough in their own ways. Let me summarize a little bit and say that legitimate conversations about difficulty in FromSoft games are good and fun to have, as long as no one's being a dick. By the way, the same goes for talking about the overall lack of accessibility options in FromSoft games, a conversation that seems to come up with every release. It's a good conversation to have, and hopefully, FromSoft figures out a way to include options to open things up to more people. That said, this is not a video about accessibility and FromSoft. There are plenty of conversations on the topic though if you want some of that, so check out the links in the description that I put there if you like. Listen. My first Fromsoftware game was Dark Souls 3, and I liked it okay at first, but I definitely didn't understand why everyone had gone so crazy about the series on first blush. Going in, all I knew about it was that it was hard, and after finishing it, I didn't really know what to say other than, yeah, that was hard. In my early days with the series and FromSoft's catalog as a whole, there wasn't much conversation to be had with me about it other than just repeating that it was tough. But that's because I wasn't engaging with the rest of what makes the games great. I didn't think about the world, or the boss design, or the mechanical depth, or the themes, or anything like that. And honestly, I would have been boring to talk to about Dark Souls back then. If the only conversation you can have about FromSoft is that their games are hard, then that's boring. And I feel like that's what's been leading the conversation with every release. I'm over it. I can't have any more surface level conversations about difficulty anymore. There's just nothing more to say. So there, now we can stop talking about it. Like and subscribe, and make sure to let me know if they ever make Margit the Fell Omen teaches typing.
Welcome to typing class. I'm your teacher.
Margit the Fell